from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons.
Tonight, after 26 hours, Republicans notch a major win in the Senate.
On this vote, the yeas are 50, the nays are 50. The Senate being evenly divided, the vice president votes in the affirmative. The bill as amended is passed.
With 3 Republicans defecting and a dramatic tie-breaking vote from the vice president, the president is now one step closer to a key political win for his one big beautiful bill after the Senate passed his $3 trillion tax and spending cut package today. Tonight, the behind-the-scenes lobbying that led to that razor-thin vote and what happens next in the House when Ways and Means Committee Chair Congressman Jason Smith joins us.
Plus, the new tariff threats President Trump is now issuing against Japan. The president today doubting a potential deal with one of the country's closest allies with just 1 week until that July 9th trade deadline that he says he will not extend.
Also tonight, from political bromance to veiled threats of deportation, the escalating war of words between the president and Elon Musk that saw Tesla's stock drop today after the president said he was open to potentially deporting the richest man in the world.
And the made-for-TV moment in Florida as the president visited what's being dubbed Alligator Alcatraz.
Very soon, this facility will house some of the most menacing migrants, some of the most vicious people on the planet. We're surrounded by miles of treacherous swampland, and the only way out is really deportation.
The president touring a new detention facility expected to hold up to 1,000 detained migrants. We'll bring you the details.
But we begin with the president's mega bill passing through the Senate earlier today in a nail-biter of a vote. Saw 3 Republicans vote against the measure. Senators Tom Tillis, Susan Collins, and Rand Paul, forcing a 50-50 tie broken by Vice President J.D. Vance, leading to applause from Senate Republicans as the more than $3 trillion package now heads to the House.
The House Majority Whip, Tom Emmer, convening a final vote for tomorrow, though the legislation still needs to pass through the House Rules Committee first. So let's get right to it now with Bloomberg's Erik Wasson, who is joining us live for more from Capitol Hill. And Erik, it seems that rules may be added for some time still to come. Are we sure that it can even get through that committee, let alone to the floor?
My prediction is it will get through the House Rules Committee, but getting it through the floor will be more difficult. We have a new story out on the website Terminal talking about the challenges that are ahead. I talked to several Freedom Caucus members this afternoon, and they are very dug in. Ralph Norman, who's on the Rules Committee, saying he's a no on the rule, no on the bill. He wants to just pass the House bill again and send it to the Senate and say, take it. That could probably lead to a conference with the Senate, which could drag the whole process in through July. The Freedom Caucus is not happy with the level of spending cuts. The parliamentarian, due to Democratic challenges, struck about $300 billion in savings out of the bill. There are more tax cuts in the Senate bill, mostly for businesses, than there were in the House bill. So there's more of a deficit cost of about $400 billion than in the House bill. So they're not happy. On the other hand, there's moderates who are worried about the Medicaid cuts that are in here, and they're threatening to bring down the bill for that reason.
In the end, though, Erik, do we believe that any of these Republican members, Freedom Caucus or not, are prepared to vote for a significant tax hike? That is what would happen if this bill did not pass.
There would be a significant $4 trillion tax hike if the bill did not pass by the end of the year, but there is still time. The more pressing deadline is the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling is raised by $5 trillion in this package. There could be a U.S. payment default by August. That's the real deadline. That still gives you some weeks to work out some differences. But once you reopen that drawing board, Speaker Mike Johnson is very worried this thing could fall apart. It's held together by duct tape, basically, and he's urging members just to accept it and pass it. And really, President Trump, has so much sway over Republicans, it'd be very hard to bet against him. So this is coming to the House floor as soon as tomorrow morning, and we'll see if the Freedom Caucus once again backs off its threats against this bill.
Knowing that they all want to get home for the 4th of July, Bloomberg's Erik Wasson live on Capitol Hill. Thank you for another great day of coverage following Senate Republicans passing their bill earlier today. House Speaker, Democratic leader in the House, Hakeem Jeffries, had this response.
This dangerous and extreme Republican budget, Trump's one big ugly bill, the GOP tax scam, this disgusting abomination will set in motion a potential economic death spiral by increasing the nation's debt by more than $3 trillion.
With that in mind, there's a new report from the Nonpartisan Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget estimating the increase to the national debt is even higher, topping $4 trillion. The organization's president, Maya MacGuineas, writing, the Senate took a bill that already borrowed way too much, took it from bad to worse. The Senate expanded, she writes, the House's tax breaks, watered down offsets, introduced new special interest giveaways, and added another $1 trillion onto the price tag, unquote. Joining us now live is Maya MacGuineas, president of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Maya, you're clearly not a fan, and I know you haven't been since this whole debate started over extending the Trump tax cuts without necessarily paying for them and following this current policy baseline. The train's left the station, though, right? This is going to become law.
Yeah, certainly not a fan. Haven't been a fan since they started with the assumption that they were going to borrow trillions of dollars, and have watched it get steadily worse. That's with one exception. There was one period when a number of members in the House said this is fiscally reckless, and they insisted on additional spending cuts. And so, yes, it is likely that this will become law, but there's one big question mark, and that's, will this group of members in the House who didn't like the version they started with and made it better by insisting they have additional spending cuts, and if they didn't meet those, then they were going to bring back, so they didn't cut as many taxes, and the agreement was that the Senate would go along with that. The Senate has missed that mark by almost or over $500 billion. So the big question is, will the House say, we're not going to take that? Because they made it very clear, multiple letters, put down a red line many times saying, we're not going to be this reckless. The other thing I'd point out is this is a made-up deadline. I'm not sure what's going on with this deadline and why people are pulling all-nighters. Keep in mind that Congress has not passed an actual budget on time in decades, over 2 decades, not passed appropriations on time in over 3 decades. And here they are on a completely made-up deadline with months to go to work this out, to make this bill better, staying up all night. And it just makes no sense. So I really think it will probably pass, but I do think there's a big question about whether the House is going to say, no, we're not going with the Senate version, and we're going to need to go back to our version and work out those differences. And I hope they do that.
Well, that is a question we all have tonight, Maya. We may not know the answer until things actually hit the floor tomorrow, and it becomes a question of what might be able to convince the holdouts. If the Speaker were to suggest that the Republicans will try to pursue a second reconciliation package later on this year to try to assuage some of those concerns of fiscal conservatives, would you buy that argument? What's the likelihood of that actually happening?
It absolutely depends. So you are hearing some people saying we should go back to this whole plan for a 2-bill approach to this. The only problem would be is if they put all the tax cuts in the first bill and a couple spending cuts and then say, don't worry, we're going to pay for it in the second bill. That would not be credible at all. But if what they did was say, we're going to do a couple of the tax cuts now and some of the spending cuts now, the ones where there's the most agreement, and then we're going to work out the next layer of tax cuts and corresponding spending cuts in a second bill, that would be much more credible. But I think what's really stunning is this. So the Republicans have said for a long time they want to cut government spending. We heard a lot of that with DOGE. We've heard a lot of that from individual members. They've not lifted the debt ceiling without insisting on spending cuts. Here we have a bill where out of a possible $86 trillion in spending over the budget window, they've only cut $1.5 trillion out of $86 trillion. And if you look at the Senate bill and you were to make all the elements permanent, it would in fact increase government spending over the time period because the interest would be so much higher. So you have to wonder, all these folks who've talked about wanting to cut government spending and have a perfect opportunity to do so, Republicans in the House, Senate, White House, and reconciliation, why they're not actually willing to cut spending and what that really says about how they are going to adjust their policy priorities and still not be fiscally reckless by not cutting spending, but continuing to cut taxes. That's a recipe that will not work.
Fascinating. If there's something you could take out of this bill, Maya, in the process of debate here, maybe you're from this Rules Committee hearing, folks like Ralph Norman are still angling for changes, and I realize that could change the process a lot and force things back to the Senate. What would you take out? Would it be something other than extending the Trump tax cuts?
So I would focus on the most pro-growth Trump tax cuts, and I'd focus on those. I wouldn't add in the new taxes, and I certainly wouldn't add in any on a temporary basis. What's absurd is that in the Senate, they're saying, well, we shouldn't have to pay for extending things. And then they're putting some things on in a temporary basis and only charging themselves for the temporary version of it. The level of hypocrisy that's going on there is crazy. So I would start with just the most pro-growth portions of the tax cuts and only put in place those that would be fully offset. I would take the Senate version of Medicaid changes, which go farther than the House do, but I would drop the salt.
Yeah.
They do more on salt. I can't understand why the Senate would do a bigger salt giveaway, for instance. There are lots of additional things that I would put back in, base broadeners, ways that you could actually put a down payment on debt reduction. But if it adds a single dollar to the debt, I would drop it, and I would start by pulling out all extraneous tax cuts and only keeping those that they're willing to fully offset. One more thing, sorry, but this one's so important. Their Medicare changes.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Their Medicare changes that both Republicans and Democrats know need to happen. Site neutral, for instance, is something they all agree on. I don't understand why they don't put those in this bill. They're reforms that would actually improve the program, not hurt beneficiaries, save money, and you could get hundreds of billions of savings from that.
Well, Maya, as you were just talking about, you would advocate for keeping the most pro-growth components of this package. How pro-growth is this legislation in aggregate? Because we know that is part of the argument Republicans in the administration are making, that, yes, consider the price tag, but also consider the way in which we might be able to grow ourselves out of that particular predicament.
Yes, that's right. And I agree. We have been calling for counting the dynamic score of anything that they come up with. So the static score, the conventional score looks at some of the behavioral effects, but we think you should look at the overall effects in the economy. And the bad news there is because our debt is so high, and this bill would actually be debt financed further, that the growth appears more likely to be negative than positive. What happens is that you get some growth from the tax cuts. That's great news. Not enough to offset the full cost, but some growth. But then you get negative growth from all of the borrowing that would be part of the bill. And because our debt is so high, that negative growth and the effect of higher interest rates would actually more than outweigh the positive growth. So yes, we should look at the overall effects on the economy. Unfortunately, because of where we are with near record debt levels, that effect appears to be negative and would actually lose a couple hundred billions of dollars. The other thing to note is that the claims about the growth that they're likely to get coming from the White House and proponents of the tax plan have been absolutely fantastical, farcical, nowhere close. Like there's a range of outside estimators who have a big range of what's likely. And then the growth that the budget committees have been putting forward is many multiples of that, not credible. Many of the members even know it's not real. So they are trying to put in a magic asterisk there. We should look at the growth numbers. And unfortunately, the news there, because of our high debt, is not good.
We're showing you a live view of that Rules Committee meeting in the House that we've been describing. Congressman Chip Roy having a few words there as they make their way through the legislation. Just lastly, Maya, you're agreeing with Elon Musk, I guess, in some ways when it comes to this bill. And he spent a lot of time posting on X about it over the weekend, got the president's attention, certainly. He wrote last night, "It is obvious with this insane spending bill that we live in a one-party country, the Porky Pig Party." I know that's supposed to be sarcastic or funny in this case, but is there some truth to it?
I'll take a different perspective. First, I'm going to align myself more with the Chip Roys of this discussion because he and other members have been serious and really looking at the deep policies, trying to figure out how to get more savings. I think one of the shortcomings of the approach that Elon Musk has taken is that through Doge and through comments like that, he's sort of perpetuated the notion that you can do this all by fixing waste, fraud, and abuse. And while there certainly is some of that, and I really am a fan of going through the budget line by line and finding it, that's not how we're going to bring our budget back into structural alignment. We have to get real. Politicians have to stop telling all these myths. We're going to have to look at the real drivers of our debt, which are our healthcare programs, retirement programs, growing interest on the debt. And we're going to have a tax system that raises enough revenue to cover those things. It's not going to be waste, fraud, and abuse. It's not just pork. It's structural programs, and oftentimes it's programs we like. But if we want to do them, we have to be willing to pay for them.
All right, Maya, always great to have you. Maya MacGuineas, president of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Thank you so much. Now, as President Trump's tax bill took a step towards meeting his self-imposed July 4th deadline to sign into law today, he's also dealing with another approaching deadline, July 9th, for trade deals. The president said earlier today that he is not considering extending that date as he threatened higher tariffs against Japan. Joining us now with the latest from our White House team is Bloomberg's Catherine Lucey. So, Catherine, bad news for Japan, I guess, but also potentially bad news for anyone else who hasn't been able to finalize a trade agreement with the U.S. yet.
Which might be the message that President Trump was trying to send, right? I mean, we've seen a lot of brinksmanship, a lot of sort of gaming on this in this process. He likes to issue threats. He's trying to move this ball. And so there are some things holding up these talks with Japan. You know, the president was very open that he wanted he felt he wanted more rice imports from Japan. They have concerns around autos and steel. Their leader also is dealing with pending elections, which might be it's affecting him, you know, domestically. So there's a lot of things happening here with Japan, but also President Trump is trying to get some kind of arrangements or agreements with a series of major economies, you know, by next week. And he is also, you know, making clear, I think, that he's prepared to be tough.
Yeah, this is a week from tomorrow.
Yes.
We're talking about.
Yep.
Howard Lutnick joined us last week on the program and suggested the prospect of 10 deals being announced in that time. Is there any chance that happens?
I mean, I think we have to see. Obviously, I think they are trying to land some deals with major economies, major trading partners. Whether it's exactly 10, obviously they already have some understandings with the UK and China, so they are, you know, they've made some progress already. But I think they do want to announce some big deals, you know, between now and then.
At least framework deals.
At least, yeah. I mean, the word deals is doing a lot of work here, but I think we will see things that look kind of like what they did with the UK and China, where they worked out terms on some pieces, other things, you know, remain sort of TBD. Yeah. So they will not be sort of sweeping, comprehensive trade deals, you know, in the traditional sense, but they will be, you know, some series of understandings or, you know, agreements.
Well, we're about to find out. Bloomberg's Catherine Lucey, thank you so much for the info. Coming up on Balance of Power, why President Trump says he'll, quote, take a look into deporting Elon Musk. We'll bring you the details, but first we'll take a look at the state of those trade deals we're just discussing with Jared Bernstein ahead, the former chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors. With us next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
You're writing letters to a lot of countries, and I think you're just starting to understand the process. We've dealt with Japan. I'm not sure if we're going to make a deal. I doubt it with Japan. They're very tough, and therefore you'll pay a 30%, 35%, or whatever the number is that we determine, because we also have a very big trade deficit with Japan, as you know.
President Trump aboard Air Force One today, talking with reporters in the back of the jet, offering a bit of an update on trade negotiations with Japan. Thanks for joining us on Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. The president also said today the July 9th deadline, a week from tomorrow, for higher tariffs to resume is firm, and threatened to cut off talks and impose duty rates on several nations, including Japan. Those comments come as Secretary of State Marco Rubio met his counterparts from Japan, India, and Australia earlier today at the U.S. State Department. Joining us now with reaction to all of this, Jared Bernstein, the former chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors in the Biden administration, and he's now senior fellow for economic policy at the Center for American Progress. Jared, it's great to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg. What are we going to see here a week from tomorrow, or maybe in the days in between? It sounds like a lot of letters are about to go out from this White House. Will any deals come in return?
Well, just as in your earlier conversation, what do you mean deals? So frameworks may come about, and that's just basically countries saying, yeah, let's keep talking about this. I mean, one of the longtime tactics of the Trump administration is to declare victory without giving you a lot of specifics. I think from the perspective of the folks listening to us, what matters most is what kind of a tariff regime we end up with on the other side of this. A lot of uncertainty there, but you can count on the fact that the effective tariff rate is going to be highly elevated. I'd put it somewhere between 15 and 20%, which takes it to levels we haven't seen in 90 years. and all the ensuing challenges that raises, both to growth, to prices, and to jobs as well. So I think we've seen this before. It is not a good economic story.
Well, as we consider that economic story, we heard from the chair of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, at Sintra today on a panel with other major central bankers moderated by our colleague Francine Lacqua. And the chairman of the Fed suggested that they went on hold because they saw the size of the president's tariffs. They may have actually cut rates by this point, if not for them. Do you really see the president's tariff policy as the primary thing standing in the way of easier monetary policy?
I do. I mean, I think we should take Chair Powell at his word, and he's been absolutely crystal clear about this. And in fact, I think he's taken a very balanced, data-driven view. He's not saying there's tariffs out there, therefore we're making our outlook much more negative, or therefore it will be many quarters before we cut rates. He's saying, let's see what the data show. Now, in fact, thus far, inflation has been relatively quiescent as far as the tariffs go until you get under the hood. We've started to see a little bit of a creep up in goods prices. And if you separate out the price effects from imports versus domestically produced goods, you can see some differences there. But we should always remember that about half of the imports about half of our imports are inputs into domestic manufacturing. So that's going to become more expensive as well. At this point, I think the conventional, or I would say the standard sort of macroeconomic inflation forecaster, is that the tariffs are going to push up inflation from somewhere around where it is now in the 2 to 2.5 range to something that's maybe a point above that. But that it's kind of a one-time hit, just like a tax, because it is a tax. It's an import tax. And then it comes down, and the Fed knows that it can look through a one-time tax, but it has to be careful doing so. It has to also be mindful of any impact on inflationary expectations. So I think the Fed is doing the right thing by waiting and seeing.
Well, so I'm looking at your Substack here, Jared, with the headline referring not to tariffs specifically, but the reconciliation debate that's taking place. And we've been discussing, of course, the big, beautiful bill passed the Senate today. Your headline, pictures of the worst budget bill of my lifetime, and I'm old. Those pictures, you don't look that old, Jared. Those pictures include 10-year costs and 10-year savings. With this in mind, isn't it actually important to have revenue from tariffs to help pay for all this?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I was going to say you could have left out the "and I'm old" part from that, but that is what I wrote. So that's true.
You look great,
yeah,
Jared.
I mean, my point is I've been around for a lot of budgets, and this is the worst one. This is a good question. And most of the estimates I've seen leave out revenues from tariffs. And I think Russ Vought sometimes puts them in. And it's a legitimate thing to do. And in fact, we've seen tariff revenues climb really quite extensively. If you look before the tariff regime came in play, we were collecting about $8 billion a month. Now it's something closer to $24 billion. The problem is it's such an uncertain path. We don't know what kind of revenues we have because we don't know what kind of tariffs will be in place. What we do know is that we're looking at, and I heard part of your conversation with Maya, we know, pretty solidly that we're looking at trillions added to the long-term deficit debt.
All right, Jared, wish we had more time with you, but thank you so much for joining us. Jared Bernstein, the former chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, now senior fellow for economic policy at the Center for American Progress. Thank you so much. And coming up, President Trump says Elon Musk government contracts could be the next victim of DOGE cuts as they battle over this tax bill. We'll have more with Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Elon Musk is ripping into this bill again. Are you concerned that Republicans are going to be swayed by Musk and his money?
No, I don't think so. I think what's going to happen is DOGE is going to look at Musk. And if DOGE looks at Musk, we're going to save a fortune. Thank you very much, everybody. I don't think you should be playing that game with me.
The feud between President Trump and Elon Musk reigniting after Musk slams the Senate and the president's tax bill. The president threatening in return to pull the billions of dollars in government contracts and subsidies that Musk's companies benefit from. The version of the bill passed by the Senate today, of course, ends the $7,500 tax credit for electric vehicles on September 30th, which is 3 months earlier than the House's version. And Tesla stock fell more than 5% today as investors weighed these developments. So here with the latest on Bloomberg TV and radio, live from San Francisco, is Bloomberg Tech host Ed Ludlow. So, Ed, when we see a move like that in the stock, is that reflecting the actual concern around the EV subsidies being removed, or more about the kind of reputational key man risk that Elon Musk might once again be bringing?
More so the latter. You know, it's showing that the Trump trade can go both ways. That, remember, in the run-up to the election last November and at periods throughout the first half of 2025, there have been moments where Tesla's shares have risen as the sort of only publicly traded proxy across Elon Musk's empire, because there's evidence that at times that close association with President Trump and the administration has been to Elon Musk and Tesla's benefit. It can also work the other way. What's interesting, though, is like the president in the last 24 hours has been very fixed on the idea that Elon Musk is upset about EV subsidies and EV incentives. Elon Musk has focused on very different subject matter. He's very upset about national debt and the composition of the tax bill. So they are talking across each other in many ways, using social media as the medium.
Well, that's for sure. He's writing shame on X to the Republican lawmakers who ran on cutting government spending. He says they will lose their primary next year if it is the last thing I do on this earth, Ed. He's also talking about starting his own political party. Instead of the uniparty, as he calls it, we'll have one that actually cares about the people. If he actually goes through with all of this, what are Tesla shareholders going to make of it then?
Kaylee's point on key man risk is really important, because the story for the stock, at least since May, has been about Elon Musk stepping back from Doge and his government responsibilities, and also sort of advisory capacity to the president, and being more focused on the companies. But his short-term track record, which included the lead up to the November presidential election, was that he has put his money where his mouth is in the political context. He was basically the biggest political donor ever in that campaign race, right? And so, you know, based on that background and evidence, you'd say, yes, he may well act on this. It's not unusual for him to post on X a poll and say that he'll honor the results of it. Whether he does or not, I mean, I'm not Elon Musk. I'm just recounting the events of what's been an astonishing 24 hours.
It's been a busy day for Ed Ludlow, and we do appreciate the analysis, Ed, the host of Bloomberg Tech. You'll have a lot to talk about, I'm sure, once again tomorrow. And for more insight into what's happening in the House now, as we examine the Senate-passed bill, we turn to Sarah Chamberlain, the president CEO of the Republican Main Street Partnership, who has been in the center of the storm. It's great to see you, Sarah.
Literally.
We usually like to slow things down a little bit and listen when you join us, just in terms of a state of play. We were just showing the members of the Rules Committee. We are expecting another wee hours conclusion there once again. Will we actually see a floor vote in the next 24 hours?
Yes, as long as the weather. I mean, we've had a terrible storm here in D.C. today. There's members actually driving because their flights have been canceled. So as long as the members can get in, we will see a vote tomorrow, probably tomorrow afternoon. So Rules will meet probably all night. There are a lot of members from the Republican Main Street Partnership on the Rules Committee. Then they take Rules to the floor, pass that, and then move forward. I anticipate probably 2 or 3 o'clock tomorrow, because I'll tell you, they want to go home. I mean, this was supposed to be a week that they were going to be home, doing parades, spending time with their families, doing constituent work. You know, they don't want to be here in D.C., so they're going to hopefully move it through and go home.
Well, they want to go home. The president wants to sign this by Independence Day. I don't know if you're expecting him to get involved with any arm twisting here, Sarah, but how many arms might need to be twisted at this point? How many holdouts are you counting?
So we're counting about 5. I know 4 of them are pretty public. I know there's 5 or 6, but, you know, they always cave. I mean, it's just,
so who are you expecting Rules that publicly right now is at least saying I'm a no?
There's a few, like Norman. I mean, he usually comes back around. I know he's looking to run in South Carolina for governor.
He got a phone call from Donald Trump.
He got a phone call. I mean, so I think Massey is always a hard no.
Yeah.
So I anticipate that. When the rest of them, you know, they're going to do what Lisa Murkowski did, frankly, in the Senate. They're going to negotiate, try to get the best package, and then go to the floor and vote yes. I anticipate this passing tomorrow, but the poor speaker, I mean, oh my goodness.
I can't imagine. He's not going to probably do a lot of sleeping tonight.
Probably not.
Probably didn't last night either.
Probably not.
He's been in touch with Senate leadership, though. He knew what was coming. He's certainly prepared a number of his members. He prepared the Main Street Partnership. How confident are we that he brings this to the floor without necessarily knowing he has the votes?
I'm 100% confident he's going to bring it to the floor because he always does, and he
So
always,
he may not.
and he always.
So that's the final point of leverage, is to call a vote.
He will call the vote. He may keep it open for a while, but he'll call the vote. I mean, he's yet to fail. I mean, we all sit here and we all talk about, okay, can he do this? Can he do this? He's done it each and every time. He's been successful. So I think he'll get this through tomorrow, and the president will be able to sign it on Friday.
Wow.
Well, as we consider this notion that we have seen things fail, at least ultimately, to pass, and it takes a little bit of negotiating, which is what you were just alluding to, something akin to Murkowski. Where is the negotiating room when it's either pass exactly what the Senate passed or have to take this to conference committee? I just don't. What can members who are currently holdouts actually get here?
They can get things in other bills. You know, I mean, they have a lot of priorities. So it's not really about change. They do have to pretty much pass this bill, or it does go to conference, and the president obviously won't be able to sign it. But they can hold out for other things and other bills. You know, we're doing the approach process. There's always different bargaining tools here in D.C.
What's happening inside the Speaker's office? Who's getting in there? Who do they see when they want to go speak with Mike Johnson? How much time do you get? Bring us into that process.
Well, I can tell you yesterday the members of the Republican Main Street Partnership had about an hour phone call with him. It started about 4:30 yesterday, and he was bringing them up to speed. Dusty Johnson, who is the chairman of the caucus, along with Mike Flood, they get a lot of face time with the speaker. He counts on them for a lot of help. So they're I'm sure they're sitting in the office with the speaker, probably as we sit here. Trying to negotiate and figure out what to do.
Well, Dusty Johnson, of course, is no longer going to be seeking re-election to the House. He's running for governor instead. Someone else I know that you know quite well, Don Bacon, is also not going to be seeking re-election. Kind of a similar instance to what we saw with Tom Tillis from North Carolina. How should we be thinking about the way Don Bacon is going to approach this vote and what his departure signals?
So Don Bacon, I actually knew back in April that he was going to retire. This is not a surprise. He and his wife had been talking about this for a few months. So yes, he announced it because it started to leak, but this has nothing to do with this piece of legislation.
So you're still expecting him to vote for the bill?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's a shame. He was retiring when he told me. I actually shed a tear or two. He's a fine man, and I don't always agree with all his votes, but he's a good man, and we hate to lose that. But more importantly, also, besides losing him, the seat now will be in play for the Democrats, and with such tight margins, that could be a problem.
Well, and of course, as we consider those seats that are in play, this bill and a messaging war around it, I'm sure, is going to factor into each and every one of them. Sarah Chamberlain will be back with us as we assemble our political panel in just a moment. But first, we want to take more on the impact of today's big Senate vote is up ahead. But first, we want to note something in regard to Bloomberg programming tonight, which is a brand new episode of Bullish with Sonali Basak on Bloomberg TV. This week's episode is all about financial literacy. Here's a piece of Sonali's conversation with Melody Hobson, the co-CEO and president of Ariel Investments, about the stock market she calls a roller coaster. Take a listen.
Everyone describes the stock market as a roller coaster. They're like, it's a roller coaster. I said, it's so fascinating as a concept because in a real life roller coaster ride, when you're at the top of the roller coaster, you feel the most anxiety. And when you're at the bottom of the roller coaster, you feel better. Except for in the stock market. Right. When you're at the top of the stock market, you feel great. And when you're at the bottom of the stock market, you feel terrible. And we reverse that in how we think about investing. When it's up here, it's frothy, we get nervous. The only way to go is down. When we're down here, we say to ourselves, there's a lot of upside. And we want to make money, not lose it.
You can find the full conversation with Melody Hobson of Ariel Investments on the brand new episode of Bullish with Sonali Basak tonight at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, Bloomberg TV, or stream it at 8 p.m. on Bloomberg Originals. Coming up on Balance of Power, we'll continue the conversation on the Senate's passage of President Trump's tax bill when we assemble our political panel coming up next.
But first, We'll talk more about other developments today, including Fed Chair Jerome Powell's latest comments on the potential for a rate cut in July. All of that's ahead on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We're watching. We expect to see over the summer some readings, higher readings, but we're prepared to learn that it can be higher or lower or later or sooner than we'd expected.
Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. That was Fed Chair Jerome Powell leading off some of the other top stories we're covering in today's Power Brief. Powell made those remarks at the European Central Bank Forum earlier today, warning the impact from the president's tariffs could show up in inflation data in the coming months, while acknowledging that uncertainties remain. Powell also did not rule out the possibility of a rate cut in July following an uptick in personal attacks from President Trump.
Oil prices have now steadied, nearing their lowest levels in about 3 weeks after tensions in the Middle East flared up in June. WTI crude trading near $65 a barrel. Brent was near $66 ahead of the July 4 holiday here in the United States. Meantime, investors and geopolitical analysts watching closely to see whether Iran's inventories of enriched uranium have in fact been depleted or whether another wave of U.S. strikes is imminent. After we got word that Iran is cutting off communication with key UN watchdog officials, deepening uncertainty over the status of its nuclear program, President Trump reiterating the U.S. will, quote, be there if Iran restarts their nuclear efforts. Iran stopped taking calls from the International Atomic Energy Agency last week. That communication blackout adding to questions over its program.
President Trump spent this morning in southern Florida visiting a migrant detention center dubbed Alligator Alcatraz. Trump toured the facility, which opened today and is expected to hold up to 1,000 detained migrants from across the country, alongside Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. DeSantis says the site is the first of several state-run detention centers to come. It's located in Florida's protected Everglades, has been opposed by environmental groups and civil advocates as protesters lined up along the highway leading to the facility today in advance of Trump's visit.
Today's visuals from Miami underscoring the president's continued push on immigration, painting a national crackdown on migrants with his one big beautiful bill making its way through Congress. The bill would allocate more than $100 billion to immigration efforts, including border wall construction. And that's where we return now to the legislation heading to the House for final passage. A Rules Committee hearing is underway. We could see a floor vote as soon as tomorrow. That's where we start with our political panel. Back with us, Sarah Chamberlain, President, CEO of the Republican Main Street Partnership, our Republican strategist, joined now by Democratic strategist Aisha Mills, founder and CEO of Community Asset Management. Great to have both of you with us. Aisha, we've had a chance to talk to Sarah for a couple of moments about this bill, and there is an expectation that it's going to pass tomorrow. What is the Democratic answer to this? Do you feel powerless, having been locked out of the process, or armed up with information to take on the campaign trail in the midterms?
Well, both. I mean, look, this entire process was completely partisan. Donald Trump said he wanted something. His minions in Congress went and got it for him. And the reality is that this isn't actually good for anybody but the people at the top, the billionaires. They are getting a massive windfall. This budget that they're passed, this reconciliation package, which will then turn into a budget, which will then ultimately open up massive tax breaks, essentially is designed to be the largest redistribution of wealth our country has seen. And this is a decade-long plan to essentially take from people who are in need, take from the average American who just pays their taxes and minds their business, take from our education system, kill our health care, to give billions and billions and billions in dollars in tax breaks to people who are already billionaires. This was not a bipartisan conversation in how we create a budget package that's going to be good for everybody. So the Democrats were absolutely shut out from that. But to your point, there's a lot to talk about here. There's a lot to talk about. First of all, starting with the fact that 800,000 jobs have just been killed with this package. They killed all the clean energy jobs, and they've also essentially eradicated every incentive to move our economy, to move our country towards a green economy. They're going to tax solar companies now. They're getting rid of incentives to use wind and to use solar and other renewable energies so that we can go back to dirty coal. It doesn't make any sense. You've also got almost $17 people who are going to lose their health care because of this. So it's bad news, and there's a lot to talk about.
Well, you could take probably any portion of what Aisha just said, Sarah, and probably expect to find at least similar language in campaign ads that are going to be running into the midterms in those vulnerable Republican seats that we were talking about a moment ago. How prepared are you for the potential consequences in 2026 of this legislation, having to fight against that messaging?
Well, all of the House and the senators that are up for re-election in those purple districts or purple states are members of the Republican Main Street Partnership, and we're ready. I mean, obviously, I don't agree with much that she just said. I mean, we have our own messaging. We're ready to go. You know, the Social Security, not paying taxes on Social Security. There's a lot of good things in this bill. Obviously, the additional money for immigration. You know, we need to not only fix our immigration system, but also deport criminals. We are going to leave the immigrants that are doing the work as far as like picking our fruits and vegetables and things. President Trump has decided that they're going to be able to stay because they are paying taxes. They are being productive. So there's a lot of positive things in this bill that we're looking to message. And we've been polling it as we've been going. We're feeling very positive about it.
Aisha, what we hear from Republican lawmakers and the administration is that it's not about cutting Medicaid, it's about making it more efficient and therefore it costs less, that we're actually eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse. You see it differently.
That's always been a lie. It's a cute little campaign slogan. There has never been any evidence of waste, fraud, or abuse. Elon botched up the job, created a whole big swirl, stole a lot of money from programs that mattered and killed them and cut them so that the billionaires could get their tax breaks. But there's zero evidence that was ever produced from Doge or anybody else that there was waste, fraud, and abuse. Americans don't buy it. So in terms of the polling, everybody, including Fox News polls, which are the Republican darling, have showed that the vast majority of the American public think that this measure that was just passed is horrible. They do not approve. This is every single poll. Those that people want to say are partisan or not partisan, etc. Americans don't buy it, and for good reason. Because using immigration as some boogeyman, as if that's somehow affecting our economy, isn't working anymore. Pointing at some people and blaming them and calling them criminals and defaming them when they're just working and living their lives isn't working anymore. And so I think from you asked the question about the campaign aspect of this, what's going to happen next year going into midterms, this is really going to come and haunt these members. I mean, I think the Republicans really know that they're on the fence with this. Nobody thinks that this is a great idea.
Well, Elon Musk also doesn't think that this is a great idea. And Elon Musk has a lot of money, Sarah, and he outright threatened yesterday to, what did he say? If it's the death of him, he'll make sure that if it's the last thing that he does on the earth, he will make sure that Republicans who vote for this package lose their primaries. Are your members actually worried about potential primary challengers being funded by the world's richest man?
Not yet. I mean, he says a lot of things. I mean, we're waiting to see. We're a long way out from primary season. And I would say Elon Musk is one of the reasons we have the White House, the House, and the Senate. So we'll see what he ultimately does. I mean, it's a lot of back and forth. And I mean, it is what it is. Yeah. We have a year to go before we find out how he really feels. You know, he's not moving any money yet. He certainly isn't endorsing Democrats yet. So,
well, I get actually quite the contrary. The post that he made over the last 24 hours was directed at both parties, Aisha. It's obvious, Elon Musk wrote, with the insane spending of this bill, which increases the debt ceiling by a record $5 trillion, that we live in a one-party country. The Porky Pig Party. Is Elon Musk going to help Democrats?
Let's break down kind of what he's saying and what this means for people. Who cares about the debt ceiling and why does it matter? This is very simple. Elon, let's all be clear, is self-interested. Doesn't matter what party it is. He cares about his money. When the debt ceiling gets raised because we carry more debt, because we have a larger deficit, what does that do? That ultimately increases interest rates. What happens when interest rates are increased? It means that it costs more money for Elon and for the local barbershop to actually get loans and to borrow money. Now, that's detrimental. It's horrible for especially entrepreneurs, small businesses, who now there's going to be essentially a shrinkage in the access to capital because it's going to be more expensive to borrow. So all this talk and this, kind of puffing out his chest that Elon is doing about the debt ceiling and the deficit is really about Elon being able to continue to run his business as cheap and effective as he wants to run it. The second thing about this, I don't have anything nice to say about Elon because he's self-interested. One of the things that happened that really turned him against this bill is that they killed all of the incentives around moving us towards a sustainable economy, which includes the renewable energy tax credits that trickle down in lots of different ways, ultimately benefited Tesla, right? One of Elon's main companies. And so, of course, he doesn't like this bill because this bill is making it more expensive for him to borrow money, essentially to run his companies off of debt. And this bill is also getting rid of the incentives that his company of the future and his green cars is based on. So that really matters because those are places, frankly, where I agree, where I fundamentally agree with regards to the policy. And so it's important for people to not look at the specter and optics of a so-called back and forth between Trump and Musk and actually understand the substance of the policies that we're talking about at hand and how that actually affects the people.
Well, when we consider those policies, be it the clean energy credits from the Inflation Reduction Act or Medicaid credits, these were some of the most contentious ones, that there were even Republicans who were reluctant to roll them back to the extent that we are seeing rolled back in this legislation. Sarah, do you expect in the future, even if it's not through reconciliation, that there may be some kind of corrective effort that some lawmakers would like to pursue in that regard?
They may. I mean, we're going to let this play out for 6 months and see. We may have to do some corrective action. But right now, we're happy with what's going on. And contrary to what your other guest just spoke about, Chairman Powell is talking about cutting the rates in July. That was a segment right before this.
He didn't rule it out.
He didn't rule it out. So we'll see. I don't agree that interest rates are going to start going up. Medicare, Medicaid. I mean, Medicaid, there's a lot of fraud and waste. People have gone to jail over it. So to say that no one's ever been caught doing it, I mean, there's people sitting behind bars that have done it. So we have to figure out where the waste is, get that cut. And then in 6 months, if we've gone too far, we can readjust. But we have to start somewhere. And that bill does this.
Well, when you think about next steps, will there be another reconciliation bill specifically?
And there may be come the winter time, but potentially. We'll have to wait and see. There's a lot going on right now. We have to kind of see how it all plays out.
Aisha, we just have a minute left, but do you see a second reconciliation bill coming?
Yeah, this is a plan. We're not waiting and seeing. The Republicans have known exactly what they were doing from the start. The whole point of this entire spectacle of what we've seen is to essentially create a dynamic in the United States Congress where they only need a simple majority to shove through their very unpopular budget and plans. So this reconciliation process set them up to have the budget that they want. So now they're set up for the tax bill that they want, that they are also going to do under reconciliation to be able to shove that billionaire windfall through with a simple majority rather than having a filibuster, which would require 60 people to support it. As you saw today, they don't have 60 people to support any of this, and they actually lost some of their Republican senators.
Yep. In fact, they only had 50, hence why the Vice President J.D. Vance was needed to cast the deciding vote. Aisha Mills, Sarah Chamberlain, our political panel today, thank you so much. Of course, the Rules Committee is still meeting, and it has to get through that first before it can get to the House for final passage. You can find coverage of the developments on the Hill in the Washington Edition newsletter, on the terminal, and online.
Going to stay off my phone tonight. Won't make that mistake again. See you back here tomorrow on Balance of Power on Bloomberg.